Today's video only has one question, and that question is, what went wrong? With the release of the Grasp of Avarice dungeon, Bungie introduced a new perk on armor specifically in this dungeon. That perk being Artifice Armor. Artifice Armor allowed you to have an extra slot in your armor, meaning you could have, let's say, multiple champion stun mods in your gloves, or you could now rock double utility kickstart plus an artifact mod in your class item because that fifth slot made everything just a little more flexible. Now, the introduction to Artifice Armor was great. It was in the master version of the dungeon, meaning it rewarded endgame players for their time investment or their skill set, and you can go in there and farm for this armor. Now, the good side was you get an extra mod slot. The downside to that was that the armor was absolute garbage statistically. You got armor that was in the 50s most of the time. Sometimes a miracle would happen and a piece would drop in the 60s, but for a vast majority of farming this dungeon, you got 50s that you would get from a prime engram in Rahul or a vendor reward engram from like Zavala or Shaxx. It was just ridiculous. Now, this didn't stop people from farming Grasp entirely, just due to the fact that there was a miracle chance that you could get decent armor from it while also farming for a Godroll Ice Luna or a Godroll 1000 Yard Stare, which were, new releases out at the time, quote-unquote new. So people were still farming it, and it seemed like Bungie was aware of the issue that the armor was dropping extremely low for a majority of the time. So with that being said, fast forward to Duality months later. The release of Duality went fairly well. It released some new weapons that were pretty damn good. Storm Chaser was king for a short time there. Also, the SMG was pretty good. The Blinding GL was also used, and it brought back some old weapons that were really good. I'm talking about fixed odds, not Epicurean. That gun is still trash. And with that release, it also brought back Gjallarhorn, which of course people just ate up and went nuts for because, oh my god, Gjallarhorn, nostalgia, etc. And that was all nice and great. The dungeon was good, it had nice guns, but what about the armor? Well, for my very first master run and my very first master title kill, I was pleasantly surprised to say that I got armor to drop, and it was insane. My very first drop was double 30 stats, max statistical armor on a legendary armor piece, which is, if you didn't know, 68 total. I got 30 recovery and 30 strength. I'll put it on the screen right now because I actually still own this armor piece to this day. Here it is. Needless to say, my first reaction was, holy shit, how lucky did I just get? And following that with, okay, let's run it back because I want to see, is this a real thing? Or is this like one-time extreme luck for me? And thankfully, after running it back several times, I could confirm that this was indeed the best armor farm in the game all of a sudden. So out the gate, Duality fixed the problem immediately. There were no 50 stat drops in Master Duality, regardless of which encounter you farmed. So you were guaranteed drops in the 60s, already instant W. On top of that, the armor was just straight up juice. You would get at least one stat in the plus 20s on every single armor piece to drop, obviously not counting class items. So you got a guaranteed plus 20, then you combine it with the Ghost mod system, and more likely than not, you would be getting drops that would be high 60s with multiple stats being in the 20s. As evidenced by the armor piece I just showed previously, you can get double 30s at a max 68 base to drop in this dungeon. So it was the complete reverse of Grasp in every way possible and in the best way possible. Also, quickly before moving on to the next dungeon, I want to make a note on the whole Pit versus Duality debate on which armor is better. Now, I will say Pit is obviously the easier of the two to farm because it's, older content, light level is less, the boss is less threatening because you just pop well and he dies. However, outside of that, Duality wins by a landslide in every statistic. First off, Pit, your high drop, quote-unquote high drop, is a plus 16 in one stat. Outside of that, it's all RNG. You get your 60 drop, but you might get a plus 16 in like strength and then get like 8 everywhere across the board other than that, which, in my opinion, is not a god roll. That's not what I'm farming for. Meanwhile, Duality, you would go in, get high 60s drop, get a guaranteed plus 20 stat, which is already higher than the 16 I mentioned, and then with your Ghost mod, you can guarantee yourself, more likely than not, to get another stat in the 20s, or just get Omega Lucky and get double 30s like I showed you previously. So, Duality statistically beats Pit by a landslide, other than the fact that the Pit boss fight is easier, and, master content for Duality would be like 1610 right now, for example. Now that that's out of the way, let's fast forward another 6 months into Spire of the Watcher. Now, Duality would go into the rotator system at this point, meaning Master Duality would only be around for 1 week on any given time instead of around all the time. So naturally, myself and everyone else and their mother thought, okay, this is fine. Spire the Watcher is going to have a Master difficulty, and this has just become the new farm where you can just farm for armor at any given time that you want on Master. And boy, was I fucking wrong in ever believing that. Let me just pop up the thumbnail for the video one more time for you guys. You guys see the problem? We went from 57 to 67 back in time through a warp hole, and we arrived back at 56. We somehow went backwards and even worse in time. Arguably the hardest dungeon boss to date to farm for a final boss. I'm not saying it's too difficult, just harder than the other ones. We somehow have gone back in time and ass backwards, and now we get 50 drops for Master Dungeons again. I don't understand how this happened, and this begs the question of what went wrong. You had a perfect system down, Bungie. You had good armor drops. You had Ascendant Shards in there to farm as well. You had Red Border farm incentive to farm there as well, whether it was Keitel or Gulron, or even the middle encounter for when Storm Chaser was meta, or maybe you wanted the SMG. You can get armor, you can get weapons, you can get materials. It was perfect. It rewarded the endgame player for playing on Master, getting their skill set up, practicing how to do the encounters, how to farm them, how to do them faster, and then you just took a dump on them in Spire of the Watcher. The thing is, they've never addressed this issue. I'm sure they knew about Keitel dropping juice armor. They did nothing about it, so naturally everybody thought, this is how it's supposed to work. This is how Grasp was supposed to work. This should be the endgame farm in the game. It should be the same thing for Master Raids, by the way. The same way Duality was. And then they release Spire, and it's back down to the worst possible odds back again. It's like I'm farming Prime Engrams at Percy's. Why would anybody want to do that? So I don't know what went wrong with this process, but it's very clear that Bungie needs to fix this problem, because all it does is just hurt your endgame hardcore player population. It drowns the incentives down the toilet. Nobody's going to want to farm Percy's to get 50s armor. If they want, you know, the cowboy hats or the class item, they're just going to do that on normal. And they're not going to farm Percy's for like Ascendant Shards, because they can just do that in GMs and Master Nightfalls. There's literally zero reason to farm Master other than to get your bow catalyst one time and then immediately leave and go to orbit and never touch it again. All in all, I'm not trying to like attack Bungie and say they're a terrible company or anything like that. I'm just pointing out the flaws in this particular system, and hopefully this is, you know, constructive feedback or criticism, whatever you want to call it. I doubt Bungie ever sees this, but if they do, hopefully this shows that this system is broken and it should be reverted, or, you know, in a joking term, just copy and paste the Duality system into the Spire system, or whatever the next dungeon will be in 3-6 months from now, whatever time you're watching this video. Hopefully the message is clear and they fix this issue, and we can get back to just being rewarded to farm Master content in the game like it should be. Let me know what you guys think. Do you agree, disagree? What would you change? Would you just keep the Duality system and think that's the best? In my opinion, that is. And yeah, I'll read the comments, get back to you guys. Other than that, enjoy the video, and if you do, like, share, subscribe, it does help the channel. Maybe hit that notification bell, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Lightfall prep soon, alright? I'm out.